Welcome to Bible Talk with Dave and Teresa.
And Charity.
And Charity. We're going to talk about Daniel. We're going to read the Bible. We're using the Christian Standard Bible version when we actually talk about it. And we're going to go into sections with this instead of just one chapter because there's a lot to unravel. So this first section is going to be Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. It says, in the third year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The Lord handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to him along with some of the vessels from the house of God. Nebuchadnezzar carried them to the land of Babylon to the house of his God and put vessels in the treasury of his God. The king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from nobility. They're to be young men without any physical defect, good-looking, perspective, and capable of serving in the king's palace. He was to teach them Chaldean language and literature. All right, so let's dive into this. First off, to understand the distance and the time, King Jehoiakim reigned between 814 BC to 798 BC. So Daniel most likely was taken hostage about 811 BC. Because it was the third year of his reign. The thing we can assess is that because the king ordered his chief eunuch that he wanted people of nobility or royal blood from the royal family to learn the Chaldean language, to learn all this stuff, and then they had to be good looking, we can assess that Daniel and his friends were of either noble blood or of royalty. So based off of this, what we're going to do is we're going to put ourselves in Daniel's position. Put yourself in a position of like your high nobility. People seek you out for advice, for guidance, for anything. There is nothing that you're lacking. You can get whatever you want, when you want, how you want, and you're highly respected in the land that you come from. Which means you're already well educated because of being a noble descent. You have to understand your heritage and what happens with it. So you're of this noble descent and you're very well educated, you're highly sought out. All of a sudden your country is under siege. Your castle, your home. Even if you look at it like just from like a home perspective. He is my husband, therefore we are a biblical family. He owns and runs this house. I help him run it. But I seek him for what are we going to do when it comes to certain things, which means he has to be educated and knowledgeable in knowing how to seek God. Doesn't mean he knows all the answers. It just means he needs to know how to seek God. Where Daniel had to know that as well and not to lose his faith. But they also had to understand his culture. And my husband being of, history major and understand, he loves history. He understands a lot more about cultures and what's happening. In fact, your major was military history. Mm-hmm. So he knows a lot about what was happening when this was probably under siege. I'm not stating that he studied this particular battle, but because he understands military history, he can see how the Assyrians or the Babylons strategically planned to attack Judah. Mm-hmm. So as that happens, now we know that Daniel and his friends were taken captive. Yep. And I've done the research, and from Judah to Babylon, it was about 1,100 miles to follow the river. The straight shot was a lot less, but you can't go do a straight shot through or you're going to die because it was a desert. They actually had to follow the river.
The Arabian Desert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that journey would have taken anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on the weather. We don't know exactly when Daniel and his friends were taken. That's not mentioned in the Bible. We don't know if it was in the winter or the summer or what have you. We just know that he was taken the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign. So now imagine yourself as a slave. Now the Assyrians, which I believe are the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, they're Assyrians, or is it?
No, it's Babylonian.
Oh, sorry,
this is
Babylonians.
after the Assyrian siege of northern, what we would know today as Israel.
Okay.
The northern kingdom, Judah.
So the Babylonians, we also know, are not of nice descent. When we go further into Daniel, you're going to see just how King Nebuchadnezzar reacts to certain things. So we know that they're not nice people. So most likely, if you're captured as a slave, they're going to bind you. They'll probably strip you of your clothes or give you some kind of like rags to wear. You're going to walk barefoot, most likely. They're not going to give you shoes to walk in because they're trying to demoralize you for the most part. They're trying to whip you into shape. And they're most likely abusive because they want to get rid of that pride that you have, the fact that you were of another country, and now they need you to understand you're no longer that country. You're now a slave to me. This is all presumptions. It's not factual. I can't prove it. It's just most likely that's what actually happened. So you put yourself in that position where you're now of noble blood. You've been taken. You've taken 3 to 6 months, depending on the weather. You are ridiculed. You're put into clothes or stripped naked, and you're probably beaten and most likely starving. They'll only give you like a little bit of food here and there to keep you alive, to keep walking.
Realistically, they were bound and chained too. And we know the Bible says that the king had his eyes gouged out.
Yep.
Don't think it happened to Daniel. The
No.
Bible doesn't exactly say, but
that's
yeah,
in the,
we do. There are Babylonian records still exist today that archaeologists and historians have looked at to get an idea of what Babylonian
right.
was like. But in terms of the Babylonian side of things, the Bible's not very specific. It obviously concentrates on Daniel and the what we know as the Israeli side or the Jewish side.
Right, and that information is actually in the book of Jeremiah. So that's when we see that the king had his eyes gouged out. But that's the book of Jeremiah. Ashpenaz is a chief eunuch, so it's implied. It's implied because he's a chief eunuch that Daniel and his friends were most likely castrated because he was the chief eunuch. So that's something else you got to think about. Not only did all this happen, now they made sure that they're castrated, and they're most likely anywhere between 17 to 22 years old. They're young. Kind of reminds me of what's been going on with society nowadays with self-mutilation and how they've been actually just hurting children. That's exactly what kind of happened here with Daniel and his friends.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, the Bible doesn't specifically say they were unicized or whatever the term is, but just from, again, records and the fact that you've got young men who are probably, they're wealthy, they're well-fed, they're noble or nobility or rich, they're, you're not going to want to have those guys hanging out with the king's harem and his concubines. So, yeah, realistically,
Snip, snap.
snip,
Yep.
snip, or however they did it, I have no idea. Probably don't want to know, but
Yeah.
realistically, they were
And even
forced
like,
vasectomies or something.
and well, vasectomies,
Eunuchs.
I'm like, vasectomies and eunuchs and castrations are two very different
Yeah,
things.
they are.
Castration is pretty much what you do to your dog, for the most part.
Yeah, but Bible doesn't say. Again, it's an inference, or not an inference. It's a kind of like a educated assumption based off what the Bible's saying and what we know about history and the Babylonian records and just cultures in the Middle East in that time.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that we can actually base this off of, just the history alone, knowing how back in the biblical timelines for royalty families or anything else like that, they would always have their servants castrated to make sure that they did not sleep with any of the females or especially the high royalty females. Now let's talk about, because now we have a better understanding of what happened with Daniel and his friends, where can we see Daniel's faith, his discipline, and his loyalty in all of this? Because I don't know about you. You can definitely, I don't know about you, the audience. I know how David and I would feel, and David will speak for himself, but as soon as I was being beaten to death, walking through, to my death, I would really have felt like, God left me. God abandoned me. It would be hard for me to keep my faith and my discipline to God because everything's being drained out of me and I'm being brought into a slavery system. So, the faith would have been very thin for me, if at all, and fading. the discipline would not have been like, I am going to still stick with my God and be here because I've already been taken. I'm just being honest of how I would be where I'm at right now. And I would be more of like, how do I make sure that the people who have me will not hurt me? That would be my discipline. Daniel was more of like, I will, love you because that's what we're supposed to do, and I will do this, but I'm going to put my God first still. And he was still loyal to God. Mm-hmm. So when you see the faith and the discipline for Daniel, just even in this alone, it shows his loyalty as well to God. Where if you put yourself in those positions, we're not really, we'd have to go through it, but if you're really honest with yourself, where would you be?
And it's extremely hard because you're looking at just completely different cultures, times. Mm-hmm. I would say the closest modern equivalency is you lose everything, like your house, your car, your job, your girlfriend, husband, wife, mm-hmm. kids, everything, and you're literally taken away. And honestly, the closest, look at the 19th century slave trade.
Yeah.
It's probably your closest, you have no idea where you're going, what's going to happen. You're being dragged off as a slave. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the closest equivalent if you put yourself in that kind of mindset. It's hard to imagine for us in modern day, society. Mm-hmm. And realistic, and they wouldn't drag them. What'd you say, 600, 700, 800 miles or something?
It was 1,100 miles.
Yeah, they wouldn't drag them that long just to kill them. They would have been dead right there.
Right.
DRT, dead right there. They probably knew they were being dragged off as slaves for whatever purpose, for whatever mm-hmm. things that the Babylonians had. But it's hard to put ourselves in that mindset just because the cultures, the time, just everything, the socioeconomic, the political climates are so different. But again, the closest thing I can think of is put yourself in the mindset of like a 19th century, slave, like an African American or something.
Yeah.
Or like an indentured servant, in colonial times.
Mm-hmm. So that's what we have for right now for Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Join us next time for Daniel chapter 1, verses 5 through 16. Until next time, we bless you. Bye.
Bye.